Hi, this is Dr. Charles Babers again, and this is another study in the Babers Bible Study series. This study is titled, What's in a Name? Jacob Becomes Israel. And in this lesson, I will look at what happened to Jacob in the 32nd chapter of Genesis and how his name was changed from his birth name of Jacob to the name Israel, which was the name of the nation that he fathered through his 12 sons. Genesis 32 and 1 through 2. And Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And when Jacob saw them, he said, This is God's host. And he called the name of that place Mahanaim. Jacob and his large family finally departed from the home of his uncle Laban, where they had lived for 21 years. Jacob was returning home to his father, who had earlier sent him away to find a wife. Genesis 28 and 2. He was returning to his mother, who had advised him to flee from his brother's wrath. Genesis 27 and 43 through 44. And he was returning to his brother Esau, who had vowed to kill him as soon as their father was dead. Genesis 27 and 41. Genesis 32 and 3. And Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau his brother unto the land of Seir, the country of Edom. Instead of simply showing up at Esau's front door one day, Jacob sent messengers to his brother to let him know that they were on the way. This would have given Esau time to prepare himself to meet his brother again for the first time after 21 years of absence from each other. It would have also given the messengers the opportunity to return to Jacob and let him know if there was any issue that they had noted when they were speaking to his brother, an issue that might have caused Jacob to either stop in place and not continue on to his former homeland, or possibly even have caused him to turn around and go back to the home of his uncle Laban. An interesting vocabulary note in this verse is that Jacob was about to be reunited with Esau, whose name means hairy, and who was also called Edom, which means red. And that reunion was going to take place in a place called Seir, which means, interestingly enough, hairy, but the land was also called Edom, meaning red. Genesis 32 and 4 through 5. And he commanded them, saying, Thus shall ye speak unto my lord Esau. Thy servant Jacob said thus, I have sojourned with Laban, and stayed there until now. And I have oxen and asses, flocks, and manservants and womanservants. And I have sent to tell my lord that I may find grace in thy sight. Hoping to appease his brother and to assuage his anger, Jacob told his messengers exactly what they were to say to his twin brother. The words that he gave his servants to speak to Esau were a bit of a mixed bag of pride and humility. The humility was shown in Jacob calling his brother Esau, quote, my lord. This reference is even more notable considering that he had stolen two of Esau's possessions that gave him the right to be considered Jacob's lord in the first place, those being his birthright and his father's blessing of the firstborn. Yet Esau still had one thing that made him lord over his brother, and that was his birth position. He might not still have the birthright of the blessing, but he was still the oldest. The pride in Jacob's words was exhibited by Jacob laying out to his brother all the wealth that he had gained during the preceding 21 years. Genesis 32, 6 through 8. And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, We came to thy brother Esau, and also he cometh to meet thee, and 400 men with him. Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people that was with him, and the flocks, and herds, and the camels, into two bands. And he said, If Esau come to the one company and smite it, then the other company which is left shall escape. The servant messengers returned and told Jacob that after they had spoken with Esau, he was coming to meet his brother with 400 men, a small army. So why was Esau bringing so many men with him? Perhaps it was because Jacob's men had told him how many manservants and woman-servants and animals that Jacob had brought. He might have wanted to show Jacob that he was not the only brother who had become prosperous while they were separated. Maybe he even remembered how they had parted ways so many years ago, and he wasn't sure whether his brother still felt at odds with him and thought that he needed to protect himself. But hearing of the 400 men coming out to meet him, Jacob became afraid, thinking that Esau planned to carry out his 21-year-old threat to kill him along with everyone who was with him. Trying to limit his losses in any upcoming armed conflict, Jacob divided his party into two groups. His thinking was that if Esau attacked and destroyed one of the groups, then the other one might have a chance to escape alive. And instead of losing all that he had and all of his family, he would only lose half. Genesis 32, 9 through 12. And Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham, and God of my father Isaac, the Lord that saidest unto me, Return unto thy country and to thy kindred, and I will deal well with thee. I am not worthy of the least of all the mercies and of all the truth which thou hast shewed unto thy servant. For with my staff I passed over this Jordan, and now I am become two bands. Deliver me, I pray thee, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he will come and smite me, and the mother with the children. And thou saidest, I will surely do thee good, and make thy seed as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. In his distress over reuniting with his brother, Jacob called on the Lord, reminding him of the promises that he had made, and asking the Lord to protect him from his brother Esau. By reminding God of his promises to make Jacob's seed like the sand of the sea, he was telling God that the only way to make that promise true was to save him and his family, or at least a part of it. It's interesting to note that Jacob only called on the Lord after he had taken his own steps to protect himself and his family by dividing his clan into two separate groups. This shows that though he may have trusted God to save him, he didn't trust him enough to leave the whole process in God's hands. Genesis 32, 13 through 16. And he lodged there that same night, and took of that which came to his hand a present for Esau his brother, 200 she-goats, and 20 he-goats, 200 ewes, and 20 rams, 30 milch camels with their colts, 40 kine, and 10 bulls, 20 she-asses, and 10 foals. And he divided them into the hand of his servants, every drove by themselves, and said unto his servants, Pass over before me, and put a space betwixt drove and drove. Genesis 32, 17 through 20. And he commanded the foremost, saying, When Esau my brother meeteth thee, and asketh thee, saying, Whose art thou? And whither goest thou? And whose are these before thee? Then thou shalt say, They be thy servant Jacob's. It is a present sent unto my lord Esau, and behold also he is behind us. And so he commanded the second, and the third, and all that followed the drove, saying, On this manner shall ye speak unto Esau when ye find him. And say ye moreover, Behold, thy servant Jacob is behind us, for he said, I will appease him with the present that goeth before me, and afterward I will see his face. Peradventure he will accept me. Even though he had already appealed to God to protect him and his family, during the night Jacob came up with another of his own plans to appease his brother, a plan that was in keeping with his own materialistic nature. He decided that he would send his brother a gift, actually several gifts, that would immediately make him wealthy in livestock and continue to enrich and sustain him and his family for years to come. So Jacob separated out several groups of male and female, clean and unclean animals from his livestock, placed each group in the control of a different servant, and sent them off one at a time in advance of the two main parties. The servants were to each meet Esau one at a time. As each came to meet Esau, they were to tell him that the animals were a gift from his servant Jacob. His hope was that all these gifts would soften his brother's heart. Throughout his instructions to his servants, Jacob continually referred to himself as Esau's servant. But this was in direct contrast to his having made himself Esau's master by first purchasing his birthright in Genesis 25:31 through 33, and by stealing Isaac's blessing, which confirmed their relative positions. That's in Genesis 27 and 28, 37 and 40. He only called himself Esau's servant for Esau's sake, but in his own mind and in his actions, he saw himself as Esau's master. Genesis 32:21 through 24a. So went the present over before him, and himself lodged that night in the company. And he rose up that night, and took his 2 wives, and his 2 woman servants, and his 11 sons, and passed over the ford Jabbok. And he took them, and sent them over the brook, and sent over that he had, and Jacob was left alone. Genesis 32:24b through 26. And there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. And when he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, Let me go, for the day breaketh. And he said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. We finally arrived at the relatively well-known story of Jacob wrestling with the angel. After he had sent away the rest of his family, Jacob was left alone on the other side of the river. A man appeared and wrestled with him all night. As the sun was about to rise, the man touched Jacob's hip joint, causing the sinew to shrink. As a note, in today's terminology, we would say that Jacob's hip was dislocated. This man demanded that Jacob release his hold on him, but Jacob refused, saying that he wouldn't release the man until he was blessed. Jacob seems to have perceived that this man was more than just a man. Jacob's demand to be blessed is somewhat reminiscent of his earlier deception of Isaac to receive the blessing meant for Esau. In both instances, Jacob desired to receive something of value from someone in authority, which he did not deserve and had not really earned. Genesis 32:27 through 28. And he said unto him, What is thy name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, Thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel. For as a prince thou hast power with God and with men, and hast prevailed. The man asked Jacob his name, and when he answered that his name was Jacob, which means supplanter or grasper of the heel, the man told him that this would no longer be his name. From that point forward, he would be called Israel. The meaning of that name isn't exactly clear, nor is it agreed to by all scholars. While most sources translate it as, quote, he struggles with God and prevails, because Jacob wrestled all night with the man, my research indicates that the root usually defined as struggle actually may mean nobility, or one with the qualities of a prince. So the name may actually mean, quote, with God he prevails as a prince. This alternate meaning is consistent with what the man said to Jacob, quote, for as a prince thou hast power with God. If we consider this event in conjunction with the 2 previous instances when God changed the names of Abram to Abraham and Sarai to Sarah, we see an interesting pattern. In each instance, 1, God himself conveyed the new name during a direct encounter with a person whose name was being changed. 2, the name change follows the subject fully embracing God's plan for his or her life. 3, the new name confirms a promise of a blessing that God had previously made to the person. And 4, The new name is a perpetual reminder to the holder of God's promises concerning his or her blessing. Every time they or anyone else says their name, they are repeating God's promise and are reminded of God's faithfulness. Genesis 32:29. And Jacob asked him and said, Tell me, I pray thee, thy name. And he said, Wherefore is it that thou dost ask after my name? And he blessed him there. After receiving his new name, Jacob asked the man to reveal his own name. The man refused to tell Jacob who he was, but did give Jacob his blessing. I wonder if Jacob was ever told of the times that God had given new names to his grandfather Abraham and his grandmother Sarah, and whether he fully understood the significance of what had just happened to him. Perhaps he did know of his grandparents' story, and that was why he asked the man for his name, because he knew that God himself was the one who had given new names to his grandparents. Genesis 32:30. And Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. In this verse, we get the impression that Jacob did actually understand and appreciate the significance of this event, because he named the place Peniel, meaning, quote, the face of God. This says that he recognized that the man with whom he had wrestled was the Lord, and that he had seen him face to face. The end of this verse provides additional evidence that Jacob appreciated the significance of what had just happened to him at the hands of this mysterious man whom he called the Lord. He said that because of this encounter, his life had been preserved. The Hebrew word translated here as preserved is natsal, which means to be delivered, defended, or snatched away. So he had started the night fearing for his life, but by the rising of the sun the next day, he had found a defender and a deliverer, and had been snatched away from the prospect of death at the hands of his brother. There's an interesting contrast between God's direct interaction with Abraham in Genesis 17 and his direct interaction with Jacob here. In his previous dealing with Abraham, God treated him as a friend, talking with him, and even sitting down with him to a friendly meal. But with Jacob, he wrestled. One can almost see in this the strange dichotomy of God's relationship with the entire nation of Israel. As with his relationship to Abraham, God would always treat the nation of Israel as a special friend. But as with the all-night wrestling match with Jacob, Israel would seem to always struggle against God and be forced, despite itself, to receive God's blessings. And as he passed over Penuel, the sun rose upon him, and he halted upon his thigh. Genesis 32 and 32. Therefore, the children of Israel eat not the sinew which shrank, which is upon the hollow of the thigh, unto this day, because he touched the hollow of Jacob's thigh and the sinew that shrank. This verse is simply an afterthought that indicates how Jacob's injury at the hands of the Lord is commemorated in Jewish dietary tradition. When the Jews eat an animal, they do not eat the sinew on the inside of an animal's hip, because that was the one that God touched when he wrestled with Jacob. Lessons to be learned from this study. First, names are important. When the twins Esau and Jacob were born, Jacob was delivered last, but he came out with his hand grasping the heel of his older brother Esau. Because of this, he was given the name Jacob, which means heel grabber or supplanter. All through his early life, that name described his personality. He was the one who was always trying to grab that which was not his own, and trying especially to take his older brother's place. But when he finally had a face-to-face encounter with the Lord, his name was changed from Jacob to Israel, one who contends with the Lord and prevails. From that point forward, he became one who no longer tried to take from others, but one who worked with God to raise his sons as a holy nation. Lesson 2, we should trust the Lord. In his distress over reuniting with his brother, Jacob called on the Lord, reminding him of the promises that he had made and asking the Lord to protect him from his brother Esau. By reminding God of his promise to make Jacob's seed like the sand of the sea, he was telling God that the only way to make that promise true was to save him and his family, or at least a part of it. It's interesting to note, however, that Jacob only called on the Lord after he had made his own steps to protect himself and his family by dividing his clan into two separate groups. Though he may have trusted God to save him, he did not trust him enough to leave the whole process in God's hands. Lesson number 3. You are known by what you do. When Jacob was younger, he was known to be a swindler and one who tried to take from others what was not his. He took Esau's birthright. He took Esau's blessing from Isaac. He took all the best livestock from his uncle Laban. He sneaked away and took Laban's daughters and grandchildren. His name, which meant supplanter, definitely matched with who he was and what he did. Later, after he had wrestled and contended with God all night, he became known as Israel, which means he contends with the Lord and prevails. Lesson number 4. God gives us second chances. Jacob's behavior throughout his life was such that he should have been disqualified from the blessings of God. Time and time again, he fought against the laws of God. He was a liar, a cheater, and a swindler. Yet over and over, God granted him second chance after second chance. Finally, he was granted one last opportunity to wrestle against God's laws and against God himself. When his battle with the Lord was over, he was ready to begin fighting with the Lord and not against him.